Welcome to our PowerPoint presentation summarizing gender identities in language education. Within our presentation, we will break Chapter 14 into 6 different parts and examine these parts in greater detail. Concepts of Gender takes a look at how the research on gender has changed over the past several decades. Until the 1990s, most research included Caucasian middle-class English speakers. In recent years, there has been a shift in the focus group to include more diverse second language learners. As a result of the new perspective, feminist scholar Judith Butler is quoted as saying, "Gender is the repeated stylization of the body, a set of repeated acts within a highly rigid regulatory frame that congeal over time to produce the appearance of substance, of a natural kind of being." Three terms have been used to describe the perspectives on gender: variation perspective, social constructionist perspective, and post-structuralist deconstructive feminist approach. In the next few slides, we will take a closer look at each perspective. Variation perspective is how males and females differ in linguistic variations such as pronunciation or grammar. Gender is viewed as the cause for language variations. The social constructionist perspective can be defined in two different ways. The first is hermeneutic perspective, which seeks to explain the male and female features of language. An example from Lakoff's research explains that women's language reflects powerlessness based on a patriarchal society. The second social constructionist perspective is socialization theory. Based on this theory, the language of men and women differs because they have been exposed to different environmental factors. These environmental factors can result in female and male subcultures. Based on Tannen's research, these differing subcultures in males and females result in what Tannen calls cross-cultural miscommunication. Lastly, post-structuralist or deconstructive feminist approach leads us to ask ourselves these two questions. What difference does gender make, and how did gender come to make a difference? Next, we will cover methods for studying gender. Before we list the different methods, let's first look at tactics that speakers often use. Adequation and distinction is how speakers view themselves as the same and or different than others. Authentication and denaturalization is how speakers claim how real or false one's identity is. Authorization and illegitimation is when speakers endorse or discredit particular social identities. Methods for studying gender among language users have included a variety of approaches such as critical discourse analysis, interactional sociolinguistics, ethnomethodology, conversational analysis, and narrative inquiry. Additional information on each of these research methods can be found on pages 375 and 376 in the textbook Sociolinguistics and Language Education. In Part 3, we will delve into research findings. Researchers have concluded that language learning opportunities are different for individuals based on gender, especially for the immigrant populations. These findings have resulted in the question, how is gender identification shaped by structural constraints and obstacles? To begin to answer this question, we must consider how each gender is affected independently. Factors that often affect females who speak English as a second language are lower paying jobs when compared to their English-speaking female counterparts, burden of child care arrangements, and limited opportunities to communicate with other English speakers. Some of the factors often affecting males who speak English as a second language are physical injuries in the workplace. A positive effect for males is they typically have more opportunities to speak in the classroom. Research findings indicate that in general, males speak about 3 times more than females in the classroom. Additional factors that can shape gender identification include the following. Immigrants who are very poor often focus on economic survival rather than education. Lack of education can lead to fewer economic opportunities. These circumstances lead back to the obstacles we discussed on the previous slide. Additionally, family conflicts may arise when children lose interest in their native cultures in pursuit of their second language culture. This new culture includes gender discourses, or ways males and females behave. This section, titled Pedagogical Practices, is included to help teachers reflect on appropriate instructional strategies to use with English language learners. Christina Higgins is the author of Chapter 14 in the textbook. The following is a quote from her about gender in the classroom. Teaching practices that strive to balance male and female students' participation in classrooms can and should be a goal for all teachers, and the first step toward reaching this goal is greater reflection on one's teaching practices. Before we address gender in the classroom, we will take a look at some general suggestions for teaching ELLs. These practices can be used for addressing a variety of student characteristics, not just gender. As you reflect on your overall classroom practices with ELLs, consider the following. Develop activities that involve the real experiences of your students. Allow students to share personal experiences. Keep in mind that the purpose of sharing is not to solve a particular problem. Instead, it allows an opportunity for students to develop language skills while discussing relevant topics. Now, you will learn about gender discourses specific to English language learners. What are gender discourses? Gender discourses are ways of being male and female that are largely learned unconsciously through socialization processes. In other words, our gendered behaviors are largely based on our social interactions. As individuals learn a new language, there are challenges that rise as they are confronted with a variety of gender discourses. Gender discourses may vary depending on the culture, language, region, and religion. One challenge English language learners face is assimilation to a new gendered identity, or how ELLs interpret their new selves. Another challenge is resisting L2 gender identities. ELLs may resist some L2 gender discourses because they conflict with the L1 gendered self. An example of resisting L2 gender identities from the text is a case study about Nadia, a teenaged Arabic-speaking Egyptian girl who lived in Cyprus. Nadia used Cypriot Greek as her second language. Though Nadia's friends encouraged her to participate in their gendered community of practice comprised of wearing, quote, sexy clothes, going to discos, and dating boys, she chose not to participate in these practices, and she mostly adhered to her Coptic parents' expectations to be a, quote, moral girl. She did not reject all aspects of a Cypriot identity, though, since she used Cypriot Greek, the primary language of young Cypriots. However, Nadia marked herself as different from her youthful peers by making more use of Standard Greek than the average teenager. As Nadia's case illustrates, learners may reject L2 gender identities because they interpret them as threatening to their first language or first culture gendered self. How can teachers bring gender discourses into their classrooms to help students shape their understandings of who they are? Allow expressive choices in language learning contexts. Keep in mind, even L1 speakers have dialect diversity and gender identity diversity. Incorporate intercultural pedagogy, an approach to teaching culture and cultural differences developed by Michael Byram and his colleagues. The goal of intercultural pedagogy is to raise intercultural awareness, or ICA. ICA is accomplished through deep reflection about one's L1 culture and L2 culture, how they are similar, different, and why. Incorporating student reflections is a way to encourage students to think about their home culture and new culture. This reflection can be done by using journals, role plays, and small group discussions.